If you think the recent Mercedes domination is bad, you should check out the results of the 1950 F1 season, the first ever Formula 1 championship, or World Championship of Drivers as it was called then. Why? Well, the fastest team was Alfa Romeo, and they won every single round of the championship they entered. In this video, we're going to take a look at how F1's inaugural championship unfolded in a sport with drastically different cars, tracks and rules compared to the modern day. Oh, but before we do, make sure you subscribe and have liked the video for future content like this. In 1906, Frenchman Alexandre Durac founded Società Anonima Italiana Durac, or much more easily said, SAID, in Milan, Italy. This company would sell Durac cars, but these models were selling slowly, so engineer Giuseppe Merossi was hired, and in 1910 a new company was formed, Società Anonima Lombarda Fabbrica Automobili, also known as Alfa. Just the year after, in 1911, Alfa ventured into motor racing, and almost immediately after making their debut in 1913, became one of the big names of the sport at the time. In 1915, Nicola Romeo took the reign of the company, and the name was changed to Alfa Romeo in 1920. Despite financial problems due to World War I forcing the government to have to support Alfa Romeo, the Italian outfit were able to bounce back to win the first AIACR World Manufacturers' Championship in 1925, as well as multiple Grand Prix across Europe at the start of the 1930s. Things soon went downhill though, and in 1933, Alfa Corse, Alfa Romeo's factory racing team, closed as the Italian manufacturer pulled out as a constructor and soon decided to back Enzo Ferrari's Scuderia Ferrari team to help them instead. Success was drying up, with Alfa's outdated cars struggling to compete with the massively funded German Mercedes and Auto Union teams, who started to reel in the wins instead. Working with Ferrari, Alfa Romeo decided to give motorsport another good go in 1938 with their new Alfa Romeo 158. Instead of having to take on the dominating German teams who were strongly backed by the government in Grand Prix racing, the Italians decided to race in the 1.5-litre Voiturette Formula category, similar to today's Formula 2. The car, nicknamed Alfetta, Little Alfa in Italian, was very quick and turned out to be one of the most successful racing cars ever produced, with the team taking a 1-2 in their first race that year. Despite rules brought in to favour the Alfas, Mercedes responded by entering the Voiturette series and clinching a 1-2 in the Tripoli Grand Prix with a secret car, not known of by the organisers. Alfa, though, did claim a further 5 victories before war saw racing endeavours halted altogether in 1940. Development ceased while the Second World War was ongoing, with the Alfettas supposedly stored in a cheese factory during that time, although after it ended, the car was continually upgraded with the engine modified from 200 brake horsepower to over 300 brake horsepower by 1948. Following the withdrawal of the German teams, due to the consequences of the war, Alfa Romeo rejoined Grand Prix racing in 1946. Despite the cars breaking down in the first race since the worldwide conflict due to a lack of time available to prepare the vehicles, the team dominated Grand Prix racing post-war with their Alfetta, and a further 12 victories for the team would roll in quickly. Heading into 1950, Alfa had won every race they had entered for after September 1946, and the car went on to win 87% of its races it took part in between 1938 and 1951. As a state-owned company, Alfa Romeo surprisingly raced on a very thin budget, using an old car and pre-war technology and material. In contrast, when the German government had decided to go to motor racing, it did so with remarkable funds, technology and people. It was therefore incredible that a car which had originated in 1938 was so victorious, most likely because Alfa had so much development time and some money at least compared to the other few constructors. Even with a 13-year-old design and having missed the 1949 season with all 3 of their star drivers being killed by crashes or cancer, very few were surprised to hear that Alfa Romeo had the quickest car for round 1 of 1950. But why was this Alfa Romeo 1950 F1 car so good? Well, let's have a little look at the mechanical side of the car. Don't worry if you get lost amongst any technical jargon, as I move on to the main focus of the video, how the 1950 F1 season unfolded in just a couple of minutes. While Alfa provided the engines and transmissions, they initially worked with Ferrari in producing the Alfetta, who constructed the car in their workshop. Ferrari engine designer Gioacchino Colombo proposed a mid-engined car, similar to that of Grand Prix Auto Union, to balance the front and rear weight, thereby making the car able to maintain equal traction in all four wheels, resulting in the vehicle being very stable in the corners. Enzo Ferrari, however, insisted that the car would be front-engined, with the engine put over the wheels that need traction to make the vehicle much more stable and maintain a relatively balanced weight distribution when accelerating. To help the overall weight distribution though, the 4-speed transmission, i.e. the gearbox with 4 gears, was incorporated into the rear of the car with the axle and differential. As for the engine itself, well, it was a straight 8-cylinder one, making the front of the car long, and these 8-cylinder engines stayed in F1 until the scrapping of the V8s in 2014. The engine was 1.5 litre and was supercharged, meaning the air is compressed to increase the amount supplied to an internal combustion engine to give each intake cycle of the engine more oxygen, letting it burn more fuel and do more work, thus increasing power, all mechanically driven by the engine. The single-stage Roots supercharger was at the side of the engine, turned by an auxiliary drive as opposed to by the chrome-nickel-steel crankshaft, allowing the car to be more compact and the chassis to be more stiff and secure. There were just 2 valves per cylinder, operated by double overhead camshafts, thrusting the valves at the correct angle for optimum combustion, as multi-valves weren't extremely effective at this time. The Alfetta's engines were extremely powerful for their capacity, and this is what gave them their big advantage over the rest of the field. The car had a basic transverse leaf spring front suspension, a single axle with vertical and transverse support, and a swing axle for the rear suspension, allowing wheels to react to irregularities of road surfaces independently, supported by leaf springs. This wasn't the most groundbreaking suspension design. The car was made of new light metals, a lot of which were introduced to racing by the German teams. The engine was designed in a manner in which it only weighed 165 kilograms or 363 pounds. The engine block, the structure which contained the cylinders and other parts of an internal combustion engine, was made of a magnesium alloy called electron, unusually in 2 separate castings that made the block more resistant to distortion. The outside of the car was a basic tubular frame chassis wrapped in aluminium bodywork, and this tidy design meant the Alfetta was quick, straight out of the box. Alfa had also mastered a special metal technology which would have been well in advance of the financial and technical resources of Scuderia Ferrari. To put some figures on the car, the 1950 Alfetta engine produced around 350 brake horsepower at 8,500 revs per minute. The current cars have 950 brake horsepower at 15,000 revs per minute for comparison. The 158, named due to its 1.5 litre engine and 8 cylinders, had a top speed of 290 km per hour or 180 miles per hour, and it weighed 710 kilograms. The supercharger could give 17.6 psi of boost, and the car used Pirelli tyres and Shell fuel. So anyway, on to the first F1 Championship event. There had been plans for a global championship featuring multiple Grand Prix across different countries discussed as early as the 1930s, but the onset of the war meant the first ever race run to Formula 1 criteria was pushed back to 1946. 1947 saw the first full season of the FIA's Formula 1 motor racing, but in a recovering world, a first championship would have to wait until 1950. Responding to the Motorcycle World Championships introduced in 1949, the FIA formed the first ever official World Championship of Drivers, a championship series set to be held across 6 of the major Grand Prix of Europe, plus the Indianapolis 500. The entry rules stated that only non-supercharged 4.5 litre pre-war Grand Prix cars and pre-war 1.5 litre supercharged voiturettes were allowed to race, in an attempt to create competitive and close racing. At the first World Championship Grand Prix in Silverstone, United Kingdom, Alfa Romeo locked out the front row of the grid, and by that I mean all 4 of their cars started at the top of what was a 4-3-4-3-4-3 lineup. The layout was rather different compared to the current version of the track, with cars racing around the perimeter of the airfield and the first corner being Woodcote. That year, the event was given the annual honour of being named the European Grand Prix. A crowd of 200,000 British spectators welcomed the race along with the royal family, with the likes of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth being introduced to the drivers and given a tour of the circuit. They weren't the only royals at the event though. The Enrico Plate team entered the semi-professional royals Baron Emmanuel de Graffenried of Switzerland and Prince Bira of Thailand, the latter amazingly qualifying 5th, thereby making him the best of the rest. Louis Chiron was the grid's most experienced driver. He'd incredibly been on the Grand Prix scene since the 1920s and lined his Maserati up in 11th. Jazz trumpeter and successful bandleader in Britain, Johnny Claes, struggled to find any pace though, and ended up starting last on the grid, his best lap a whole 15.4 seconds behind a teammate. A number of cars were denied entry into the British event, including some rejected on the account of the car being too old, or even too new. Others failed to turn up to the event, and so their entry was withdrawn from the weekend. The moment the flag failed to mark the beginning of the first ever F1 World Championship race on May the 13th at Silverstone, there was little doubt what car would cross the finish line first. Leslie Johnson became the first retirement when his supercharger spectacularly blew up on just the second lap. Not long after, the second ERA of Walker pulled into the pits with gearbox issues. The team swapped drivers, with Tony Rolt taking over from Peter Walker to see if he could make an improvement, something that was allowed back then. However, after a few laps the shared car of Walker and Rolt was out of the race, meaning just 5 laps in, the fastest British manufacturers were out. In the middle of the race, at the 4.6 km circuit with an average speed of 146 km per hour, most cars came into the pits for fuel, and the Alfa Romeo pit crew impressively got the cars refueled in a sub 30-second pit stop, as the Alfa team continued to impress. Farina was leading for most of the race, and trailing the Italian, Fangio made its challenge for the lead on lap 60, but his car ran wide and collided with one of the straw bales at the exit of the corner. An oil pump had been cracked following the impact, and he was forced to pull into the pits to retire on lap 62 with just 8 laps to go. Despite one of the drivers retiring with the engine trouble, the opposition of the Maseratis, Talbot Lagos, and the English racing automobiles were unable to catch the effective Alfettas, and the team finished on all 3 steps of the podium, with Farina converting his pole into an early lead and winning from Fagioli by only 2.6 seconds. Briton Reg Parnell enjoyed his first and only podium in Formula 1 on home turf, although he finished 52 seconds down the road from the winner after smashing his radiator grille due to hitting a hair. The closest car to Alfa Romeo was fielded by French team Talbot, but Frenchmen Giroux Cabantu and Rosier, who finished 4th and 5th respectively, could only manage to end the race 2 laps down with the car. Matt Amies did an amazing highlights video of this race, which I'll leave in the description for you to check out after this video. The Italian and German factory teams in these olden days often employed 2 to 3 drivers whose nationality was the same as the team's and at least one foreign driver. Alfa Romeo had gone with Italians Farina and Fagioli, as well as Argentine Fangio. Note that third-placed Parnell was just a guest driver for the first Grand Prix, and he did not race with Alfa ever again in F1. Nino Farina was the first F1 race winner, following his success at Silverstone. Nino became a doctor, although it's not known what of. Some sources say political science, while others mention engineering. And growing up, the Italian was very sporty, playing lots of skiing, football and athletics. He had a rather crash-prone career, with many injuries, and was involved in 2 fatal accidents. Despite this, he was considered very quick and intelligent with his racecraft, and was the Italian champion in 1937, 1938 and 1939. This, alongside leading the championship, meant Farina was looking like a strong favourite for the title. Luigi Fagioli was the oldest of the 3 at 51, born in the 19th century, although he wasn't even the oldest driver to line up for F1's first race. 53-year-old Philippe Etoncelin was, born in 1896, the earliest birth year of a driver. Luigi was a Grand Prix veteran, one of the last remaining drivers who raced in the dominant German Silver Arrows cars of the 1930s. Since then, however, he had developed health problems such as crippling rheumatism, even needing a cane to walk at one race. he was extremely confident and was often known to display a fiery temper and retaliate against other drivers on the track when he felt they had done something wrong. Ironically, he himself was known for his opportunistic overtakes and developed a somewhat negative reputation after he had several significant race crashes. Despite his personality and old age, Luigi still remained a reliable pair of hands though. I'm sure if I were to ask you to tell me one fact about F1 in the 1950s, a lot of you would mention Fangio and his 5 drivers' championships. Regarded by many as one of the greatest F1 drivers of all time, the South American, nicknamed El Maestro or the Master in English, abandoned his studies in childhood to pursue auto mechanics. Alfa Romeo's third signing was late and somewhat unexpected, but after winning the Argentine Turismo Carretera back-to-back, Juan Manuel was snatched from Maserati, having dominated the first non-championship F1 race in 1950, and he went on to get the highest winning percentage in Formula 1. With the Alfa Romeo 158 set to dominate for the rest of the season, attention turned to who would win the championship as opposed to what team. Alfa weren't actually the first Formula 1 World Constructors Champions though. That's because that additional championship was only introduced in 1958. Not only did Farina leave Britain ecstatic with 8 points for winning, but Nino also got an extra point for setting the fastest lap. Side note, you didn't have to be in the points or even finish the race to get this point in the 50s. While you would imagine Fagioli would have been very happy with getting 6 points coming second, the championship rules state that only the best 4 results count when counting up the points at the end of the season. Winning 4 of the 7 races would therefore guarantee you the title, so if Luigi wanted to clinch the title, he couldn't afford to sit back and let his teammates win the races. 3rd, 4th and 5th got 4, 3 and 2 points respectively from the event. Alfa Romeo wouldn't be having it all their own way this year though. Ferrari joined the F1 circus for round 2 at Monaco, with Enzo Ferrari pulling his cars out of the Silverstone race, believing the prize money given out by the Brits was insignificant. If anyone was going to beat Alfa Romeo in 1950, it would be Ferrari. With Silverstone being on a Saturday, Monaco was the first race to hold an F1 championship event on a Sunday. The Monaco Grand Prix had returned after a year's absence from the calendar following the death of the city-state's prince, Louis II. After a year of mourning, Prince Ranier III welcomed the Grand Prix circus back to the Principality. The race lasted 100 laps around a track almost identical to the current version, besides the final sector, Nouvelle Chicane, and the location of the start-finish line. Things weren't going to plan for Ferrari so far this year though. Lead designer Gioacchino Colombo had left Ferrari to defect to Alfa Romeo for 1950, and at Monaco, the event organisers announced that the first 5 grid positions would be allocated to the 5 fastest cars in the first-time practice sessions. The only problem was that Ferrari were unaware of this and only arrived at the circuit for Saturday qualifying, gifting Alfa Romeo and Fangio pole, from Farina in second. The third F, Fagioli, was struggling and could only line up in 5th, a whole 4 seconds behind teammate Fangio and slower than a Maserati and Talbot's car. At least he wasn't as slow as band leader Johnny Claes, who was the slowest of those to set a lap, 21.8 seconds off the pace and 7.5 seconds off the nearest competitor. Although at least he himself made the start, unlike Alfredo Payan, who sustained a broken leg following a practice crash on his debut. The Argentine would never race in F1 again. The race would see one of the biggest crashes in F1 when championship leader Farina spun on some water at the back, which had been splashed onto the circuit by a wave. Fagioli spun, trying to take avoiding action, but crashed, and as the track narrowed, cars were left with nowhere to go but hit into each other. The promising young Argentine, Jose Frolin Gonzalez, managed to grab 3rd in qualifying with his Maserati, but after hitting Farina in the accident, his fuel tank burst on lap 2, causing him to crash and receive 2nd-degree burns from the fiery inferno that was the remains of his car. His teammate Franco Roll also had broken an arm in the multi-car pile-up. With cars scattered all over the track, the drivers had to navigate their car around what was an obstacle course for a number of laps, but this caused Ferrari driver Villoresi to stall, and then Prince Bira stopped his car by the accident to have an argument with the marshals for not clearing the wreckage fast enough. With just 9 of the 19 starters remaining, and Alfa Romeo teammates out of the race, Fangio was able to get through the wreckage of the cars on the following laps to breeze to the line. By setting fastest lap, getting pole and winning the race, having led every lap of it. Juan Manuel became the first driver to get a Grand Chelem. This round had effectively cancelled out Silverstone, and Fangio went joint top of the standings with Farina. There were 3 different teams and nationalities on the podium, with Italian Ascari getting second in the Ferrari, and Monegasque 50-year-old Louis Chiron getting a popular third with his Maserati. Chiron's home podium gave him his only F1 points, and as recording this video in 2020, Leclerc's first points in Azerbaijan 2018 means Monaco is the country with the longest gap between 2 compatriots scoring points. Sommer and Bira took the final points, while Bob Girard, in his 1935 ERA car, the oldest vehicle to take part in an F1 race, beat Johnny Claes for 6th, aka second last. Instead of partying for the whole of the next week though, Fangio stayed in Monte Carlo to tend to the injuries of friends, fellow Argentinians, and former teammates Alfredo Payan and Jose Frullian Gonzalez. Selflessly, he took the time to drive Payan all the way to Bologna to hospital, and then returned to Monaco to drive Gonzalez to a specialist burns unit in Italy. The third round of the 1950 F1 season was across the Atlantic Ocean in the United States. The event, named Indianapolis 500, was part of the championship, although not to run to Formula One regulations and rarely contested by the European teams. None of the 1950 Grand Prix drivers took part in the oval race held at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and none of the Indy drivers, all of whom were American, took part in any of the remaining Grand Prix that season. It was a standalone event, held since 1911, that was added to the championship, presumably to increase the prestige and reputation of the series. The race would never be important for Formula One and was no longer part of the championship after 1960. I don't want to drag the video on by talking about the race and the background of the event and drivers taking part, but in summary, the race was held on a Tuesday, meaning the first 3 F1 championship races were held on 3 different days of the week. The race was originally scheduled for 200 laps, or 500 miles, hence the name Indy 500, but was stopped after 138 laps due to rain, making it the first F1 wet race. Apparently, Farina originally planned to enter, but his car never arrived. Due to the events that took place in Silverstone and Monaco, Johnny Parsons won with the fastest lap and so hilariously jumped up 31 places in the standings to joint first with Farina and Fangio. Parsons therefore became the first American to win a World Championship race, meaning the first 3 F1 winners were from 3 different continents. He is also the only Indianapolis 500 winner to have his name misspelled on the Borg-Warner trophy, as the silversmith carved Johnny with a Y instead of Johnny with an IE at the end of his first name. The win also means Parsons is technically one of 3 drivers to win on their F1 debut, along with Farina, even if everyone was debuting in both the events those 2 drivers won. Despite the 500 being Parsons' only race in the 1950 World Championship, it would be enough to see him finish the championship 6th on points. Second place Bill Holland also ended up 7th overall. Maury Rose and Cecil Green picked up championship points, finishing 3rd and 4th respectively. Joy Chitwood and Tony Brentenhausen finished 5th together, taking turns at driving, so the points were split and both were awarded 1 point. This was the first time the points were split between drivers in an F1 race. And for the 3rd time in succession, 5 different drivers got their first points in F1. In other words, with just 5 positions getting points per race, 16 different drivers had scored points 3 races in. Yeah, think about that for a second. Even though the championship feels like it should just be starting, round 4 of 7 at Switzerland was the midpoint of the season. The race was actually in Switzerland, unlike some of the later Swiss Grand Prix, and was held in the north of the de facto capital of Switzerland, Bern. The 4.5-mile event involved racing on a temporary street course which had no true straight, instead being a collection of high-speed corners. The circuit of Bremgarten's tree-lined roads, often poor light conditions and changes in road surface made for a very dangerous circuit, especially in the wet, and its latest fatality was that of Alfa Romeo driver Achille Varzi, just 2 years before, in 1948. Varzi's memorial is the only sign that racing took part on the Swiss roads of 1950's most forgotten circuit, with sections of the track returned to nature and having a motorway built on. The race took part on Sunday, June the 4th, on the same week as the Tuesday Indy 500 event, and in a surprisingly tight championship with retirements in the first two rounds, the regular drivers were grouped and were ready for action. The Ferraris were clearly making improvements, but in qualifying their car wasn't quick enough to catch any of the Alfas, and Fangio, who had dominated throughout practice, qualified on pole, with Farina and Fagioli somewhat lagging behind. There were some new faces in the F1 paddock. Nello Pagani, a motorbike champion, came in to replace the injured Payan, and the inexperienced local Antonio Branca also made his debut, whose mysterious motor racing career was allegedly financed by an admiring Belgian countess, the Vicomtesse de Rosier. Johnny Claes wouldn't be finding himself on the back row this qualifying. Despite the lack of rain, the track as ever would prove difficult due to the uneven surface, gravel and the degrading tarmac. Everything this weekend was falling into place for Fangio, with the Argentine making a near-perfect start and storming into the lead ahead of Farina and Fagioli. Contrarily, Louis Fagioli was struggling and was passed by Ascari in the Ferrari, who was able to stick to the leading two Alfas. The Ferrari of Villoresi was next to pass Fagioli, as he appeared to be dropping back into the secondary pack. However, hopes for a Ferrari challenge to the Alfas were dashed when Ascari pulled into the pits to retire with a broken oil pump on lap 4, Villoresi's engine blew up on lap 9, and the final Ferrari retired over suspension failure. Maserati got a podium last race, but the Italian manufacturer was also running into problems when Bonetto's fuel pressure system exploded whilst coming in for his pit stop. Him and his mechanics were unfortunately not injured, but on lap 19, 5th place Eugene Martin went off at Amat corner, and unluckily for him, the car flipped and Martin was thrown from his car, urgently rushed to hospital with serious injuries. With the Ferraris out of the competition, the Alfas were unbeatable, and by lap 33, Fangio, Farina and Fagioli had all lapped the entire field. That lap, however, Fangio pulled into the pits when he began to detect engine troubles on his car. As the mechanics completed their inspection, it was evident the problem was terminal, and with just 6 laps to go, Fangio was forced to retire despite having dominated the entire weekend. This was gutting for the Argentine. Having closed the gap at Monaco to Farina, he was forced to sit on the sidelines due to no fault of his own, to watch Nino take home a crucial victory with the very same chassis that won the 1939 edition's Voiturette heat here, in fact, whilst he also got the fastest lap point, ahead of Fagioli. With 2 wins as part of the now championship leader's best 4 results, and with just 3 races left, a 3rd win for Farina could all but guarantee him the title. Rosier's ingenious plan of going the whole race without stopping for fuel paid dividends, and landed him in 3rd position to take Talbot's first F1 podium. He was the only driver to perform this strategy, but by doing so, helped set the record for the oldest podium in Formula 1, Farina being 43, Fagioli 52, and Rosier 44. That's an average of 46. It had been a frustrating result for the Thai Prince, who had driven well the whole race, and would have had a chance for a podium if not for mechanical mishaps. He was forced to finish 4th ahead of teammate Bonetto, and he would never get a better opportunity to earn himself a top 3 in F1 ever again. Claes and Swissman Bronca rounded off the 11 finishes. Next up was Belgium. The race took place at the Old Spa circuit, the longest track on the calendar in 1950, at just over 14 kilometres or 8 miles. With only 3 rounds left in the championship, the title looked like it would be awarded, unsurprisingly, to one of the 3 Alfa Romeo drivers, although despite their reliability problems, the Ferrari cars were still in for a shot at the title as well. Just like the fortnight before at Switzerland, Ferrari bought an upgraded package as they tried to search for their first win. Sommer was having none of it though, and the driver, famous for his lack of commitment to a racing team, decided he was going to race with Talbot instead at Spa. Rosier had been the quiet achiever of this season, but having scored Talbot's first podium at Bern, the Frenchman's 6 points meant he too remained in with a title chance. By the time of the Belgian Grand Prix, the pace of the season was beginning to tell, with only 14 cars arriving at the Spa circuit, not least due to the high costs. Maserati only bought 1 outdated car, and there was only a lone British competitor, Alta. To the annoyance of the team, Ferrari's new 275 car clearly wasn't working as desired, showing when it could only qualify 7th compared to Villaresi in the old Ferrari bagging 4th, he himself still being 10 seconds down on pole. Fangio and Farina set equal times of 4 minutes 37, however Farina was awarded the pole as his second fastest lap was quicker than Fangio's second best lap. Despite racking up the podiums, Alfa Romeo's old veteran was still lacking the speed of his young teammates and was third, 4 seconds off the pace. Home favourite Johnny Claes was having mechanical troubles, so, you guessed it, he was forced to line up on the back row behind Swiss amateur driver Tony Bronca, who was a worrying 1 minute and 8 seconds off the pace. Mind you, sole Briton Geoffrey Crossley was only a second quicker than Bronca, over half a minute behind the car ahead. I'm not sure anybody was shocked when Farina and Fangio immediately shot away into the distance, while older Alfa driver Fagioli got overtaken by a Ferrari on the first lap again. Luigi was only behind Villaresi for a lap though. Out in front, Farina and Fangio continued to swap positions, but neither of them could open up a lead. They both pitted on lap 11 for fuel, leaving Fagioli to lead, but when he pitted a lap later, Sommer found himself in first. Having switched from Ferrari to Talbot, the Frenchman attempted to copy teammate Rosier with his Swiss strategy by not pitting. It was the first time, besides Indy, that a non-Alfa Romeo car led a lap of an F1 race. Of course, Sommer's time in the lead didn't last long, as he was quickly passed by Farina and Fangio, but it was an exciting moment for the team, as the Talbot Lagos were looking competitive. In fact, Raymond Sommer was running at a faster pace than Fagioli's Alfa in 4th, but his hopes of maintaining a podium were dashed on lap 20 when his engine blew. Back out front, Fangio and Farina continued to dice for the lead. After their second round of pit stops, however, Farina began to suffer from falling fuel pressure. This was a big moment in the championship. Agonisingly for Farina, his team could do nothing to fix the problem, and while Fangio won, Lino dropped behind Fagioli and even the non-stopping Rosier, with the Frenchman incredibly dragging his Talbot onto the podium for a second consecutive race. Ascari couldn't catch Farina's slow Alfa, and a disappointing weekend for Ferrari, who weren't performing competitively, meant they had to settle for a best of 5th. The three of Claes, Crossley and Bronca all ended up at the end of the finishes, but I mean, at least they finished the race. With 4 Grand Prix down, only result better than the previous 4 events would now count. Of course, each Alfa Romeo driver has had at least one race where they've scored no points, so any point-scoring result would increase their championship tally by the amount they score. Despite car problems, Farina had managed to rescue 3 points, plus a point for fastest lap at Spa, and these 4 points meant Farina led the championship with 2 rounds to go, points that could be very crucial come the end of the season. While Fagioli was ahead of Fangio in the championship, the Argentine's best 2 results are better than that of Luigi's. The penultimate round of the calendar would be held at Reims in France, a triangular street circuit whose pit lane is still left standing to this date. All eyes were on Farina. If Nino got the full 9 points, then only Fangio would be able to challenge for the title, and even then he'd have to finish second at the French Grand Prix to prevent Farina becoming champion. On the contrast, if Fangio won the final 2 events, he'd have the 4 wins he needed to win the title. The penultimate round at Reims in France would therefore be critical. Whilst there was a better turnout than at Belgium, nearly half the grid did not arrive at practice, these drivers being happy to participate in the race starting from the lower half of the field. Better than Franco Comotti though, who failed to turn up to the race at all. As was predicted, the Alfa Romeos were dominant in qualifying, the long straights meaning that the Alfetta 158's powerful supercharged engines were unrivalled. Yet again, Ferrari were having problems with their new 258 car in practice, and while the problems continued, and acknowledging that the old Ferrari 125s would be no match for the Alfa Romeos, Enzo Ferrari ordered the withdrawal of his 2 cars. He did not want to suffer another humiliating defeat to rivals Alfa Romeo, so only left the single non-works Ferrari to race. This was the first of only 3 World Championship races that Scuderia Ferrari entered but did not start, the others both being in 1982. In a league of their own, the 3 Alfa Romeo cars locked out the front row, and it was Fangio who dominated qualifying, thrashing Farina by 1.9 seconds. With the Ferraris gone, Talbot also impressed, securing 4th, 5th and 6th on home turf. Farina's good start saw him overtake Fangio, but the drivers were more worried about their cars than the drivers around them. The conditions were awfully hot at Reims, and the cars started falling like flies. Chabot failed to make the start, then almost immediately after the beginning of the race, the engines of the cars began to fail, Sommer unable to complete 4 laps. The long straights put a serious strain on the engines, and it was looking like the French Grand Prix would be a war of attrition. Maserati was struggling. Between lap 3 and lap 10, all their cars of Gonzalez, Hampshire, Chiron, Roll and Parnell had retired with engine problems. Rosier, Claes nor Bonetto could manage 14 laps, and less than 25% into the race, only 9 cars were still running. Then, on lap 18, Farina slowed. The Alfa was suffering from fuel starvation, and it took the Italian's mechanics 7 minutes before it could be sent back onto the track in 5th place. With his main rival in trouble, Fangio began to open up a big lead, while second-place Fagioli was unable to maintain his teammates' pace. This was a massive moment for the championship. If Farina was unable to score at France, he would drop from 1st down to 3rd heading into the final round. Nino Farina floored it, aggressively disposing of Manzon and Whitehead ahead of him to get back to 3rd. This was his championship to lose. Farina had set the fastest lap and had returned to a podium position. His fuel feed problem returned again though, and he was forced to pit and then make his way back up to 3rd for a second time. But the problem wasn't going away, and on lap 50, Nino was forced to retire and look on, while Fangio agonisingly took the only thing Farina could have ended the race with, the fastest lap point. Nothing could stop Fangio from taking an impressive 25-second win and 9 valuable points. It was advantage to the Argentine. Farina had dropped to 3rd. The reliability problems of the Talbot Lagos and the Maseratis had meant that Peter Whitehead, who had started the race from last on the grid, had put his private Ferrari into a brilliant 3rd place. Manson incredibly finished in his Formula 2 specification Simca Giordini 4th, while veteran Etoncelin and Jabou shared 5th place, one of 2 cars to have a driver swap with the exhausting heat. All talk was about the championship finale though. Heading into the final round of the championship at Monza, any of the Alfa Romeo drivers had a chance at taking the glory. All 3 of them were separated by just 4 points. It was pretty clear what Fangio needed to do to become champion, finish 1st or 2nd. Even then, the Argentine could win the title if his teammates ran into problems. The championship had now become Juan Manuel's to lose. Interestingly, 3rd place Farina was in a better position than Fagioli to win it overall, as his best 3 results were better than his countrymen's. But Nino was a whole 4 points behind Fangio, and to win the championship he had to get all 8 points for 1st and the fastest lap, and Fangio had to be placed 3rd or lower. The only problem was that Fangio had won every race he'd finished, and even if Farina did beat the Argentine to the line, would Fagioli or another car really happen to split the 2? Despite being the slowest of the 3 Alfa Romeo drivers, Fagioli was somehow still in with a shot, having not won a single race in the season. The driver, who had been competing in motor racing since 1931, would have to change his fortunes if he wanted to be crowned the winner of the 1950 F1 Championship though. Only a win with fastest lap, with Farina being 3rd or lower, and a Fangio retirement could see Luigi get the title. But with his finishing consistency and the frequency of the car problems so far this season, nothing can be ruled off the table. Just to chuck an extra variable in, Alfa Romeo signed Piero Taruffi and Consalvo Sanesi as 4th and 5th drivers for the final race. This would be a final opportunity for Taruffi to prove his worth to a top team, and although believed to be an incredibly quick racer, Sanesi had yet to show any worth in F1. With the 5 cars for the race, Alfa Romeo had a good chance of taking all 5 points placings at their home Grand Prix, a dream result for the team that had totally dominated the inaugural Grand Prix World Championship. There was pressure on everyone's shoulders to deliver this. Everything was set for a thrilling first finale at a high-speed Monza track, similar to today's layout but with absolutely no chicanes. In case the situation wasn't crazy enough, Ferrari had announced they were bringing a new 375 model to the race, and as shown from its impressive debut, which unfortunately saw a crash that injured 24 spectators and killed 3 of them, it was quick. In response to the release, former Ferrari designer Giuliano Colombo decided to debut Alfa Romeo's 1951 F1 car, the Alfetta 159. Fangio, Fagioli and Farina were given the new chassis to assist in their championship fight, whilst the one-off entries of Taruffi and Senesi was compete in the old 158 model. It wasn't all good news for some teams. Talbot Lago decided to abandon their works team and their development in Formula 1 after a disappointing French Grand Prix, only running old cars for the remaining F1 races they took part in. This was a shame as the French team provided some spirited performances, often being there to pick up a lost podium place when a front runner dropped out of the race. Italians Maserati also decided to enter a whole host of vehicles. Hilariously, team owner Enrico Platti attempted to acquire an entry for his older amateur racing cousin Luigi Platti for the weekend. The car picked was an old Talbot Lago 700 that had been out of date in racing since 1926. Unsurprisingly, the entry was withdrawn, although this would have been the oldest car to race in the sport. Enrico couldn't get Bordini, a top pilot in the Italian Air Force, to participate in the race either. Amateur racer Luigi De Philipps would also eventually withdraw his entry with Maserati as well. Old veteran Paul Peach did go on to race, however, and in 2011 he became the first centenarian F1 driver, dying as 100 years old the year after. Commotti had been persuaded to come out of his retirement for the race, and Bonetto, for some reason, decided to enter Maserati's very first car design. In qualifying, Fangio got pole, meaning Alfa Romeo would start first in every race in 1950. But amazingly, Ascari, in the new fuel-efficient and quick Ferrari, managed to push Farina down to 3rd place. Fagioli could only manage a second-row start, beaten by 5th driver Senesi for 4th place, while former motorcycle champion Serafini in the Ferrari took 6th over Alfa's 4th driver Taruffi. The quickest non-Ferrari or Alfa Romeo cars were 10 seconds off the pace, showing how fast these Italian teams were. The slowest cars were some of the Maserati entrances, as well as a Ferrari car with a Jaguar engine in it. Fangio was in the prime position for the World Championship, with Farina's best time 2 seconds slower than Fangio. But could reliability, the other Ferraris and Alfa Romeos play a big role in the outcome? As the flag dropped for the historic 1950 title decider, the 3 championship contenders knew that in 80 laps' time, one of them would be crowned F1's first ever champion. The powerful supercharged Alfa Romeos beat the non-supercharged Ferraris off the start. Farina had taken the lead from 3rd on the grid, with Fangio going 2nd and Alfa's Senesi in 3rd. Despite the poor start, Ascari regained ground, overtaking Senesi and Fangio for 2nd. Ascari was now phenomenally chasing the leader. This was not what Alfa Romeo were expecting, although I'm sure the championship leader heading into the final round. Fangio didn't mind the strong Ferraris. The top 7 were all in range of each other, with the rest of the field dropping back at a rate of knots. Senesi's promising first World Championship drive for Alfa Romeo was brought to an end when he retired on lap 11 with engine failure from 4th place. Was this a sign of things to come? Were Alfa going to have engine problems? Well, embarrassingly, on home turf, Maserati certainly were. A situation only made worse when Commotti decided that he was going to retire, unwilling to race non-competitively in a sport that had taken the lives of so many of his friends. The circuit then claimed Lavaux's Talbot Lago with brake failure and the bizarre Ferrari Jaguar sports car of Biondetti, who fell out of the race with engine failure. 9 cars were already out by lap 17. At the front, Farina was ahead of Ascari, who had briefly taken first while battling for the lead. Only one of 2 occasions in Alfa Romeo wasn't leading. The one time Farina needed a car in the way between him and Fangio was happening to be that one time in 1950 that the Alfa Romeos had been threatened. If Nino could reclaim the fastest lap, he'd become the net championship leader. Things were starting to fall into place for the Italian. But then, on lap 21, Ascari's engine gave up. This was tough to take for Ferrari, who were seeing their first F1 win get away from them. The Ferrari of Serafini was called into the pits, and Ascari took over, in the hope that he could salvage a good result from 6th. This, of course, cemented Fangio's position at the top of the standings for the time being. Fangio could now stroll around to earn his first Drivers' Championship, taking no risks with the car. But then, just 2 laps later, Fangio suffered his own engine failure. Unbelievably, the championship had turned on its head. The Argentine returned to the pits and took over Taruffi's Alfa car, coming out back onto the racetrack in 6th. Fangio could not let Farina win this race. Second place would not be good enough anymore, as the points he scored would be halved. Even with a point for fastest lap, 4 points would not win the Argentine the championship. This was still in Fangio's hands. He just had to win and the championship would be his. Just a few laps later, however, on lap 29, disaster struck for Fangio. The car he took over had engine problems. There was nothing he could do. The 5th Alfa had retired. There were no other cars left for him to take over. Juan Manuel could do nothing but watch on. Incredibly, he had retired twice from the race and could now only hope Farina's car would suffer the same fate. The problem was, Fagioli was now in 2nd. If Nino had engine problems which forced him to be relieved of 1st, Louis Fagioli would somehow be in a position to win the championship. Things looked bleak for Fangio. There was a glimmer of hope though. Ascari was looking quick again in his Ferrari and overtook Fagioli for 2nd. Could he force the others into a mistake? Despite this, the top 3 didn't change for the rest of the race. In a tense final round, Farina cruised to victory and in doing so became the first World Drivers' Champion of Formula 1. History was made at Monza and Farina, albeit arguably thanks to better reliability record than the generally faster Fangio, would forever go down in the record books as the first ever championship winner. On the podium alongside Farina were the 2 drivers of the shared car between Serafini and Ascari, as well as in 3rd place Fagioli, who, like Fangio, was gracious in defeat. This was Serafini's only outing in F1, meaning he finished on the podium in 100% of the races he did, the only driver to have this achievement. All the attention was on Farina though. The Italian had won the championship at his home Grand Prix, the only driver to this day to do so. Alfa Romeo had incredibly won every single Grand Prix, and all 5 non-championship races they contested. But Ferrari were becoming quicker and quicker, and were now threatening for wins. Everything was pointing in the direction of a spectacular 1951 Formula 1 season. How would that go? Well, you'll have to subscribe to this channel to find out next time. But that's the end of the 1950 F1 season review then. I've tried to cover in a good amount the background detail of the Alfa Romeo company and their 3 drivers, as well as look at how the year unfolded, all mixed in with a bit of technical stuff. But if you have made it to the end of the video, I'd like to thank you, and if you have any comments, good or bad, it would be great to know so I can improve for future videos. I have mentioned it a few times, but a subscription would be much appreciated as we're on the road to 3 subscribers. But thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in another video. Bye.